Basic fighter maneuvers are tactical movements performed by fighter aircraft during air combat maneuvering, in order to gain a positional advantage over the opponent. BFM combines the fundamentals of aerodynamic flight and the geometry of pursuit with the physics of managing the aircraft's energy-to-weight ratio, called its specific energy. Maneuvers are used to gain a better angular position in relation to the opponent. They can be offensive, to help an attacker get behind an enemy, or defensive, to help the defender evade an attacker's air-to-air weapons. They can also be neutral, where both opponents strive for an offensive position, or disengagement maneuvers, to help facilitate an escape. Awareness is often taught as the best tactical defense, removing the possibility of an attacker getting or remaining behind the pilot. Even with speed, a fighter is open to attack from the rear. Introduction. Basic fighter maneuvers are actions that a fighter aircraft makes during air combat maneuvering, historically known as dogfighting. The development of BFM began with the first fighter aircraft during World War I, then continued with each following war, adapting to the changing weapons and technologies. Basic fighter maneuvers consist of many varying tactical turns, rolls, and other actions to get behind or above an enemy, before the opponent can do the same. BFM are typically universal maneuvers which can be performed in most any fighter aircraft, and are usually considered to be training maneuvers. Training usually begins with pilots flying the same type of aircraft, pitting only their skills against each other. In advanced training, pilots learn to fly against opponents in different types of aircraft. So pilots must learn to cope with different technological advantages as well, which more resembles real combat. In actual air combat maneuvering, variations of these basic maneuvers may become necessary, depending on the different types of aircraft involved, the weapon systems each side is using, and the number of aircraft involved. BFM are used in the three-dimensional arena of air combat, where maneuvers are not limited by simple two-dimensional turns, such as during a car chase. BFM not only relies on an aircraft's turn performance, but also on the pilot's ability to make trade-offs between airspeed and altitude to maintain an energy level that will allow the fighter to continue maneuvering efficiently. BFM also relies on the pilot's understanding of the geometry of pursuit within the three-dimensional arena, where different angles of approach can cause different rates of closure. The fighter pilot uses these angles not only to get within a range where weapons can be used, but also to avoid overshooting, which consists either of flying out in front of the opponent, called a wing line overshoot, or crossing the enemy's flight path, called a flight path overshoot. The fighter pilot with the most advantageous position is usually above or behind the opponent, and is commonly called the attacker. Conversely, the pilot in the disadvantageous position is usually either below or ahead of the opponent, and is referred to as the defender. Most maneuvers are offensive, such as the barrel roll attack, high yo-yo, low yo-yo, and lag roll. Defensive maneuvers more often consist of turning very aggressively to avoid the attacker's guns, with maneuvers like the break and the high yo-yo defense, sometimes tightening the turn, sometimes relaxing it, and other times reversing the turn. The defender will usually maneuver to force an overshoot, or to extend the range enough to dive away and escape. However, other, last-ditch, maneuvers are used by the defender when the attacker achieves a firing solution, or the defender's energy becomes depleted so that maximum turn performance cannot be maintained, such as guns defense, or the defensive spiral. History. Basic fighter maneuver development began during World War I, with maneuvers such as the Immelmann, named after German pilot Max Immelmann, the break, and the barrel roll. However, the modern Immelmann differs from the original version, which is now called a stall turn or hammerhead turn. The original Immelmann was an effective maneuver in the early part of the war, but as aircraft technology advanced, and fighter engines became increasingly more powerful, it became a dangerous maneuver. because the opponent could climb and shoot the German fighters when they were almost motionless at the top of the turn. Billy Bishop, the top Canadian ace of World War I, described the break: watching carefully over your shoulder and judging the moment he will open fire. You turn your machine quickly so as to fly at right angles to him. His bullets will generally pass behind you during the maneuver. During World War I, due to the low power of early aircraft, the most common type of engagement was known as a lubbery, which consisted of two fighters chasing each other around the same circle, often 180 degrees apart. This type of engagement, however, is energy depleting, causing the fighters to lose altitude until they run out of maneuvering room. This type of fight became a game of chicken, forcing one fighter to attempt an escape before crashing into the ground, and giving the advantage to the other. As engines became more powerful, three-dimensional tactics became available to counter the stalemate of the lubbery, allowing fighters to maneuver onto the tail of their opponents. Development continued through each consecutive war, as aircraft and weapon systems became increasingly more advanced. Maneuvers such as the combat spread were first devised by pilots like Werner Molders during the Spanish Civil War. A simple, non-turning form of the low yo-yo is depicted in John Godfrey's description of his first kill, flying a Republic P-47 Thunderbolt over Europe during World War II. Breathlessly I watched the 109 in between the breaks in the clouds as I dove. At 12,000 feet I leveled off and watched him up ahead. In diving I had picked up speed, and now had hit 550 miles an hour. I was about 500 feet below him and closing fast. Quick now, I've got time. I checked all around, in back and above me, to ensure that no other Germans were doing the same to me. My speed was slacking off now, but I still had enough to pick up that extra 500 feet and position myself 200 yards dead astern. The 109 flew as straight as an arrow, with no weaving. As his plane filled my gun sight, I pressed the trigger. However, much of the modern energy management techniques, which are used in maneuvers like the yo-yos, were only described scientifically after John R. Boyd developed his energy maneuverability theory during the Vietnam War. Even so, as quoted by the U.S. Navy Air Training Command, 1. The basics of ACM have not changed since the early days of aviation. And 2. A fighter pilot must maintain constant aggressiveness for success. As the Red Baron would say, all else is rubbish. Training. Basic fighter maneuvers are used by fighter pilots during a dogfight to gain a positional advantage over an opponent. Pilots must have keen knowledge of not only their own aircraft's performance characteristics, but also of the opponent's, taking advantage of their own strengths while exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. Pilots need good eyesight, situation awareness, and the ability to maneuver against an opponent in 3 dimensions. BFM are generally grouped into 2 categories: primary BFM, relative BFM. Primary maneuvers are those which are performed without respect to an enemy's position. These are often simple maneuvers, such as climbs, turns, aileron rolls, slow rolls, and rudder rolls. Relative maneuvers are performed in relation to the motion of another aircraft. These are often more complex, including energy-saving maneuvers, such as the high and low yo-yos, and repositioning maneuvers such as displacement rolls. It is easy to fall into the trap of considering BFM to be a series of set maneuvers providing a foolproof recipe for a dominant position. The reality is that BFM are a series of fluid and often improvised proactive and reactive actions, varying infinitely according to range, altitude, speed, aircraft type, weapons system type, and any of an enormous range of other factors. An extremely successful tactic one day may yield unfortunate results if repeated the next day, and pilots often credit luck as a major factor. BFM are normally considered to be individual maneuvers, where ACM is applied to the tactics behind dogfighting as a whole. In military training, BFM are often conducted against an adversary in the same type of aircraft. This allows the pilot to fly against a machine with known performance values and allows aircrew to build their awareness of important concepts such as sight picture rates of closure and line of sight rates that are cues to being successful in the visual arena. This also allows pilots to build their BFM skills against one another, without either having a particular technological advantage. Dissimilar air combat training consists of advanced maneuvers performed by aircraft of two separate types. This training is valuable in that both pilots are not as aware of the performance capabilities and characteristics of the other aircraft and, therefore, must rely on the fundamental BFM principles and evaluation, decision-making skills to maneuver to an advantageous position versus their opponent. In this type of training, the advantages of one type of fighter may differ greatly from the advantages of the other, so pilots learn to refine their BFM skills to make use of the opponent's weaknesses. Using BFM as the building blocks for multiple aircraft maneuvers, such as the finger four, loose deuce, and thatch weave, pilots learn how to maneuver in situations involving 1 against 1, 1 against 2, 2 against 2, 2 against many, or even 1 against many. This type of training, introduced during the last stages of flight school, is more like actual combat, and is the most beneficial for aircrew once basic BFM skills are mastered.